Ethan Walker did not stop to think. He just ran. The woman was face down in the dry creek bed, her horse gone, her body still, the summer heat pressing down on her like a judgment. He turned her over with rough hands that had never once been gentle, and felt her chest barely moving against his palm. Something broke open inside him that he had kept sealed for years. He did not know her name. He did not know where she came from. He only knew she was dying, and he refused to let that happen. Sure. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow every part to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1884 had come in brutal and unforgiving across the high country of Colorado, and Ethan Walker had been awake since before the light touched the eastern ridgeline. He had calves to check a fence line that had given way sometime in the night, and a water trough that kept going dry, no matter how many times he patched the split wood at the base. None of it was new trouble. All of it was his trouble, and his alone, the way everything in his life had been for the past 6 years. He was 36 years old and had the hands of a man 20 years older. Thick-knuckled, rope-scarred brown past the point where any amount of washing could get them clean. He wore the same hat he had worn since he was 20, the brim shaped by 1,000 mornings just like this one, and his boots were resoled twice and cracked at the left heel, and he had never once considered replacing them because they still did what boots were supposed to do. His horse, a dark roan gelding named Colt, knew the trail down from the cabin without being told. Ethan rode with the reins loose, and his eyes moving the way they always moved, not looking at anything in particular, looking at everything at once. 6 years in the high country above Calder's Pass had taught him that the mountains never announced their dangers. They just delivered them. He had been born in a valley town, raised by a father who worked the silver mines until the mine caved and took him along with it. Ethan had been 19 then, old enough to understand what was lost, young enough to still believe he could outrun grief if he moved fast enough and worked hard enough and stayed far enough away from people who expected things from him. He had married once. Her name was Nora. She was good and steady, and she laughed at things he never thought to laugh at, and she made the cabin feel like something worth coming home to. Then the fever came through the valley in the summer of 1878, and it took her in 4 days, and took their unborn child with her. And after that, Ethan Walker stopped believing that good things were built to last. He was not a man who talked about any of that. He was a man who checked fence lines before sunrise and came back at dark and sat on his porch without a lamp and listened to the mountain go quiet. The cattle were fine. The fence line took him an hour to reset with wire and a mallet and his own weight braced against a post that didn't want to hold. He was riding back along the lower trail, the one that curved through a stretch of dry creek bed where the water only ran during snowmelt, when Colt stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Planted all 4 feet and refused to move. Ethan had ridden Colt long enough to know the difference between stubborn and spooked. This was neither. This was the horse telling him something. He stood in the stirrups and looked ahead. The creek bed curved sharply 30 yards out, cutting behind a stand of scrub oak that had gone dusty and half dead in the heat. He could see something on the far side of it. A shape that didn't belong. Dark fabric against pale, dry earth. He swung down from the saddle and went on foot. She was face down when he reached her. Dress torn at the shoulder, one boot missing hair loose and spread in the dirt around her like something dropped and forgotten. Her left arm was bent wrong at the elbow, and even from 2 steps away, he could see the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. Alive. Barely. Ethan knelt and put 2 fingers to the side of her throat and felt the pulse thin, fast, unsteady as a candle in wind. He turned her over as carefully as a man with his hands could manage, and she made a sound low in her throat. Not a word. Just pain, finding a way out. Her face was young. 20-something. Pale under the sun damage on her cheeks and the dried blood at her temple, where she'd struck something when she fell. Her dress was the kind that cost more than he made in a seasoned dark blue, fitted with buttons he didn't know the name of. There was a ring on her right hand with a stone in it, the color of still water. He did not let himself think about any of that. He stripped off his outer shirt and wrapped it around her bare arm, the one with the boot missing. Then he lifted her all of her dead weight and unanswering and carried her back to where Colt stood, waiting with the patience of a well-trained animal. Getting her up across the saddle alone, was harder than he made it look. He managed. He walked Colt all the way back up to the cabin, keeping one hand on her the whole way, feeling for the pulse in her wrist every 100 yards without thinking about why he was doing it. I had her on the cot inside, and a fire built up. Not for warmth, the summer didn't need it, but for light, and to boil water before she opened her eyes the first time. She looked at the ceiling. Then she looked at him. She did not scream. He had half expected screaming. Where she started. Mountain cabin, he said. Calder's Pass north side. You were in the creek bed off the lower trail. She tried to sit up. Don't, he said. Not unkindly, just flat. A fact. She stopped, looked at her arm wrapped in his shirt, looked at her hands, looked at the ceiling again. My horse, she said. Gone. I didn't find a horse. She closed her eyes. He watched her breathe through whatever that cost her the news, the pain both at once, and she didn't make a sound doing it. My arm, she said. Bent wrong at the elbow. Might be broken, might be dislocated. I'm not a doctor. Can you? No, he said. I can't set a break and I won't guess at one. There's a town physician in Calder's Pass. That's 8 miles down. You're not traveling 8 miles in the next few hours. She opened her eyes again and looked at him directly for the first time. Who are you? She said. Ethan Walker. She held his gaze for a moment. He watched her take inventory of him the way people did the worn clothes, the scarred hands, the cabin that told its own story about the kind of life he lived. I'm Clara Whitmore, she said. The name meant nothing to him. He had a pot of water heating and a strip of clean cloth he'd cut from an old shirt, and he was more concerned with the wound at her temple than with her family name. All right, he said. Clara Whitmore. Do you know how you fell? My horse threw me. Something in the trail I don't know. A sound. He spooked, and I went over his head and down the bank. She paused. I don't know how long I was there. Long enough, he said. You got any other injuries you know of? My ribs hurt. Left or right? Left. He didn't touch her ribs. He cleaned the cut at her temple with the warm water and the cloth, and she held still for it with the kind of practiced stillness that told him this was not the first time she had held herself together through something that hurt. You're going to be all right, he said. It was not a reassurance. It was a diagnosis the same way he might assess a fence line or a sick calf. Matter of fact. She seemed to understand it that way. Thank you, she said quietly. He didn't answer that. He went to the stove and poured himself a cup of coffee and stood at the window with it. The physician came at sundown. Ethan had ridden down to Calder's Pass himself in the afternoon, told Doc Hennessy there was an injured woman at his place, and ridden back up ahead of the old man's wagon. He had not given Clara's name. He hadn't thought it mattered. Hennessy had been doctoring in Calder's Pass for 30 years, and had the disposition of a man who had seen everything twice, and been surprised by none of it. He examined Clara's arm, dislocated at the elbow, not broken, and set it with the kind of efficiency that made her go white, but not cry out, which seemed to earn a small nod of professional respect from him. 3 cracked ribs, I'd guess, Hennessy said, feeling along her left side through the dress. Nothing punctured. Head wound is clean. She needs rest, not movement. How long? Ethan asked. Week minimum. Less if she insists on being foolish about it. Clara, lying on the cot and looking at the ceiling, said, I'm not foolish about things. Good, Hennessy said. He snapped his bag shut and looked at Ethan. She's staying here. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at him. I have no other option at present, she said. Then she's staying here, Ethan said. Hennessy drove back down the mountain with the look of a man who had already forgotten the arrangement because it wasn't his problem. Ethan stood at the door and watched the wagon go. Behind him, Clara said, You didn't have to send for him. I know that required you to ride down and back. I know what it required, he said. I'm just saying. You needed a doctor. I got one. He turned back in from the door. It's not complicated. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Most people would have left me there. He looked at her then. Really looked the way he hadn't let himself in the creek bed. I'm not most people, he said. He didn't say it like a boast. He said it the way he said everything, flat and plain and without decoration. She held his gaze, and he saw something shift behind her eyes. Not gratitude exactly. Something more careful than that. Something like reassessment. He gave her the cot. He slept on his bedroll near the stove the way he used to do in the early years before he'd built the second room that still sat empty. He woke twice in the night to check on her, once because she'd made a sound, once because the silence felt wrong, and both times she was asleep with her injured arm resting across her stomach and her face so young in the dark that he turned away from looking at it. By the second morning, she was sitting up on her own. By the third morning, she was trying to stand. "You'll set your ribs back if you move too fast," he said from the table where he was eating. "I've been lying still for 3 days," she said. "You've been lying still for 2.5 days. She looked at him. He looked at his plate. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I need to send word to my family." "I sent word." She stopped. "Yesterday," he said. "Rode into town, left a message at the telegraph office. Told them Clara Whitmore was injured and recovering at a homestead on Calder's Pass North Trail. Gave the address." He took a drink of coffee. "They'll know by now." She was still for a moment. He heard her let out a long, slow breath. "Thank you," she said. Again. Quieter this time. "You mentioned your family twice yesterday while you were half asleep," he said. "Seemed like they'd want to know." "What else did I say?" "Nothing I'm repeating." She laughed. He hadn't expected that. It was short and surprised, and it changed her face entirely, and he looked back at his plate and didn't comment on it. They came for her on the 4th day. He heard the horses from inside the cabin and stepped out onto the porch to find 3 riders coming up the trail moving fast. The man in front was maybe 60, broad across the shoulders, riding a horse that cost more than Ethan's entire property. Behind him came 2 younger men who had the look of hired hands who'd been told to look dangerous. The man in front pulled up short at the edge of the yard and looked at Ethan the way certain men look at other men, sizing and dismissing in the same motion. "I'm looking for my daughter," he said. "Clara Whitmore." "She's inside," Ethan said. "And you are Ethan Walker. This is my property." The man Whitmore clearly looked at the cabin, looked at the yard, looked at Ethan's clothes and hands and everything else. "You're the one who found her," he said, not a question. "I am." Whitmore swung down from his horse without being invited, and the 2 men behind him did the same. "I'll want to see her," Whitmore said. "She's been expecting you," Ethan said. He stepped aside from the door. Clara was sitting on the edge of the cot, dressed, her injured arm resting in a sling made from one of Ethan's neckcloths. She had brushed her hair back and pinned it. He'd found her a couple of pins from a tin that had been Nora's and offered them without explanation, and she looked composed in a way that she hadn't looked at all in the first 2 days. "Papa," she said. Whitmore crossed to her and took her face in his hands and looked at her the way fathers look at children who have come close to not being there anymore. "You're all right," he said. "I'm all right," she said. He stepped back and looked around the cabin with a different kind of assessment. Ethan watched him take inventory the same way Clara had: the worn furniture, the simple stove, the shelves of canned goods and tools, and the absence of anything that looked like comfort. "Mr. Walker," Whitmore said, turning. His voice had a different register now, the voice of a man who was accustomed to transactions. "I owe you a debt. Name your price." Ethan was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "I don't have a price," he said. Whitmore's eyes narrowed slightly. "Every man has a price, son. I'm not your son," Ethan said. Flat, even. "And I didn't pull her out of that creek bed because I expected payment. She was in trouble. I helped. That's the beginning and the end of it." The 2 hired men exchanged a look behind Whitmore's shoulder. Whitmore himself stood very still. "You're serious," Whitmore said. "I generally am," Ethan said. Clara was watching from the cot, and Ethan didn't look at her, but he felt her attention the same way you feel sunlight shift. Whitmore reached into his coat and produced a fold of bills that would have been a full season's earnings for a man in Ethan's position. He set it on the table between them. "For your trouble," he said. Ethan didn't look at the money. "Pick that up," he said, "and take it back the way it came." Mr. Walker, Mr. Whitmore. Ethan uncrossed his arms and let them hang at his sides. Not a threat, just an ending. Your daughter needed help, and I helped her. I've fed her and made sure she had doctoring and kept the place decent enough for her to rest in. I don't want your money. I want you to take her home carefully, because she's got cracked ribs and a dislocated arm that's only been set 4 days, and the trail down is rougher than it looks. He paused. That's all I want. The room was very quiet. Whitmore picked up the money. He didn't say anything else. He nodded once, short and stiff, and turned to Clara. Ready to travel, he said. Yes, Clara said. She stood slowly. Ethan moved to the door to give her room to pass, and she stopped in front of him and looked up at him directly. Thank you, Mr. Walker, she said, for all of it. Take care of that arm, he said. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she walked out the door, and Whitmore followed, and the 2 hired men followed after that, and Ethan stood on his porch and watched them ride back down the mountain without moving until they were out of sight. Then he went inside and cleared the cot and went back to work. I thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later when Ethan rode into Calder's Pass for supplies. The feed store was run by a man named Garvey, who had known Ethan for most of 6 years and liked him approximately as much as Garvey liked anyone, which was not very. But Garvey had always been consistent about it. He sold Ethan what he needed, kept the exchange to the minimum necessary, and that was the arrangement. That morning, Garvey looked at Ethan sideways when he came in. Ethan put his order on the counter. Garvey filled it slowly with the energy of a man building up to something. Heard you had the Whitmore girl up at your place, Garvey finally said. She was injured, Ethan said. I brought her in until she could travel. For 4 days, Garvey said. Ethan looked at him. What are you saying, Garvey? Garvey did not look back. I'm saying what people are saying. Then say it plain. Garvey sacked the last of the order and pushed it across the counter. People are saying a man with nothing to offer doesn't go out of his way to nurse the richest girl in the territory for 4 days out of the goodness of his heart. People are saying there's ambition in that kind of charity. Ethan paid for his supplies. He picked up the sack. People, he said, can say whatever fills their time. He walked out. But the thing about Calder's Pass was that it was small, and it was slow, and gossip moved through it like water through cracked ground, finding every gap, filling every space. By the time he came back for supplies the following week, it had gotten worse. A woman he'd never spoken to crossed the street to avoid walking near him. 2 men outside the barber stopped talking when he passed and watched him go with the particular silence that isn't silence at all. He went about his business and said nothing. But it was building. He could feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives. The man who started it, really started it with purpose and direction, was Harrison Cole. Ethan had seen Cole around the territory over the years, without ever needing to know much about him. The son of a Denver banking family down in Calder's Pass, with money to invest, and the manner of a man who had never once been told no, and had organized his entire personality around that fact. 38 years old, well-dressed, pleasant to speak to, in the way a man can be pleasant when the pleasantness costs him nothing. He had been. Ethan learned from the general store owner's wife, who talked freely and without filter engaged in negotiations with the Whitmore family for some time. Not formally, but the kind of negotiations that happen when one wealthy family believes another wealthy family's daughter would be a useful addition. Clara Whitmore, in other words, had been in someone's plans long before she ended up in Ethan Walker's dry creek bed. Ethan learned this, the same way he learned most things, by listening more than he talked, by staying where he was, and letting information come to him rather than chasing it. He filed it away the way he filed most things, and went back to his work. Then Cole came to see him. He came on a Monday morning with 2 men behind him, and the kind of smile that men practice in mirrors. Mr. Walker, he said from the edge of the yard, I was hoping we might have a conversation. Ethan was repairing a section of porch railing. He didn't set down his tools. About, he said. About the situation with Miss Whitmore, Cole said. He swung down from his horse uninvited again and walked partway across the yard with his hands in his pockets. I understand you did a decent thing helping her out, and I want you to know that those of us who care about her well-being are grateful. Ethan drove a nail. But I think you can understand, Cole continued, that your involvement, your continued association with her and her family creates a certain difficulty. I don't have an association, Ethan said. Well, that's the thing. Cole stopped walking and stood with the comfortable stillness of a man who believes he is about to explain something to someone who hasn't understood it yet. The story's going around, about your time alone with her. 4 days in a mountain cabin, a man in your circumstances and a woman in hers. That kind of thing creates questions. Questions that affect her reputation. Questions that affect her family's standing. Her arm was dislocated, Ethan said. Her ribs were cracked. I got her a doctor and kept her still until she could travel. I know that, Cole said pleasantly. And you know that. But people, Ethan said, driving another nail, keep coming up in conversations about me lately. Cole's pleasant expression shifted slightly. Just slightly. The way a surface shifts when something underneath it moves. Mr. Walker, he said, I'm going to be direct with you. I'd appreciate it. You're a poor man. You have nothing to offer a woman like Clara Whitmore. No land, no prospects, no standing in this community. You helped her in a moment of crisis, and that was a decent act. But if you were to pursue any further contact, if the rumors were to have any substance, you would damage her reputation, humiliate her family, and ultimately harm the only person in this situation who doesn't deserve harm. He paused. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Ethan set down his hammer. He turned and looked at Harrison Cole for the first time since the man had ridden into his yard. I understand exactly what you're saying, he said. You're saying that a man without money has no right to the dignity of being treated honestly. You're saying that because I'm poor, the decent thing I did becomes something suspicious. You're saying that who I am and what I have in my pocket are the same thing. He took a step off the porch, and Cole, to his credit, didn't move back. And I'm saying to you that I have no interest in Miss Whitmore beyond wishing her a full recovery. I never did. But I'll also tell you this. I won't be told what I deserve by a man who rode up to my property uninvited to explain my limitations to me. Cole held his gaze. I'm trying to be civil, Cole said. So am I, Ethan said. This is me being civil. I'd like you to leave. Cole studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, a different smile than the one he'd arrived with, something smaller and colder underneath it. Fair enough, he said. Good day, Mr. Walker. He rode back down the mountain with his 2 men behind him, and Ethan watched them go, the same way he'd watched the Whitmores go, standing still on his porch until they were out of sight. Then he went back inside and sat down at the table and poured himself a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he wasn't paying attention. I was not a man who frightened easily. He had lived on this mountain long enough to know that the things that came for you in the night were usually things you'd seen in the daylight first. He had seen Harrison Cole now. He filed that away too. The letter came on a Thursday. It was written in a neat hand on paper that cost more than his dinner, sealed with wax, the color of dried blood. Mr. Walker, I have been told of the conversation Mr. Cole had with you on Monday, and I want you to know that I was not aware it was going to happen, and I do not approve of it. I owe you a more honest communication than the one you received. What you did for me was not a small thing. I know you have heard otherwise from a number of people in Calder's Pass, and I am sorry for that. You did not deserve to be thanked with suspicion. I am well. My arm is healing. My ribs still remind me of the fall when I breathed too quickly, but the doctor says another 2 weeks should set things right. I did not write this letter to cause you further trouble. I wrote it because I was raised to believe that people ought to be thanked properly, and I have not yet done that. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Properly. Clara Whitmore. He read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the tin box on the second shelf, the tin that held Nora's hairpins and his father's last letter and the deed to the property, and went out to check his fence line. He did not write back. He told himself there was nothing useful in writing back. But he kept the letter. Clara Whitmore was 26 years old and had never in her entire life been allowed to be wrong about anything out loud. She had been raised in the kind of wealth that carried its own set of rules. Rules about what to say and what to leave unsaid, about which feelings were acceptable and which ones were to be managed quietly in the privacy of one's own room, about what a woman of her position owed to her family name and her family's future. Her father was not a cruel man. She had always understood that. He was a man of his era, shaped by a belief that the world worked the way it worked, and that fighting the current was a waste of energy better spent navigating it. Her mother had died when Clara was 11. What was left behind was a father who loved her with the particular fierceness of a man who has only one thing left to lose, and who expressed that love primarily through the management of her circumstances. She had grown up knowing that she would be married strategically, that her value to the family was not only personal but economic, that the man she married would need to be someone who consolidated rather than diluted what the Whitmore name had built. Harrison Cole was not a bad man either. That was the difficulty. She had met worse. She had met worse in drawing rooms and at dinner tables and at the kind of events where men like Harrison Cole moved through the world with the confidence of people who had never once been told that what they wanted might not be what they were going to get. How was handsome. He was educated. He was charming in company. He spoke to her with a kind of practiced attention that she recognized because she had been taught the same skill, how to make someone feel seen without actually seeing them. And the thing about Harrison Cole, the thing that sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't dissolve, was that he had never once asked her what she wanted. Not in the year of careful conversations and attended events and quiet negotiations between families. Not once. She had been lying in a mountain cabin with a dislocated arm and cracked ribs, fading in and out of consciousness, when a man she had never met had knelt beside her in the dirt and done the opposite. He hadn't asked her anything at all in that first moment. But everything he did, the care with which he moved her, the cloth he wrapped around her bare arm, the fact that he had ridden 8 miles and back to bring a doctor. She hadn't asked for, told her something that she was still 3 weeks later trying to put into proper language. He had treated her like someone worth the trouble, not because of her name, not because of her family's land. Despite her unconscious state and her torn dress and her ruined hair and her utter inability to offer him anything in return. She had written him the letter because it was the right thing to do. She had kept thinking about it afterward because she was beginning to understand that the right thing and the easy thing were nothing like the same. The town meeting was called on a Friday evening. Ethan heard about it from a ranch hand named Delbert, who rode up to return a borrowed tool and mentioned it in the same breath as the weather and the price of feed. The way people mentioned things they thought you already knew. "Cole's calling it," Delbert said, "about the water rights. They want to reroute the upper stream." Ethan went still. The upper stream ran through a wedge of land at the top of Calder's Pass that fed water to 6 properties below it, including his. It was old land predating the town charter, with water rights attached that had been established and documented when the territory was first settled. "Whose stream?" he said. "Cole's claiming it runs through Whitmore land before it hits yours," Delbert said. "Says the rights belong to whoever owns the source, not the channel. That's not what the territorial charter says." Delbert shrugged in the way of a man who knows what's right and has already decided not to fight about it. "I'm just telling you what I heard." Ethan went to the meeting. The town hall in Calder's Pass was a single room with wooden benches and a platform at the front where the town commissioner sat when he was present, which was not often. That Friday evening, Harrison Cole stood at the front of the room with a map he'd had drawn up and a lawyer he'd brought down from Denver and the quiet authority of a man who has already decided what the outcome of the meeting is going to be. Ethan came in late and stood at the back. Cole's lawyer walked through the argument with the efficient boredom of a man explaining something to people he considered his intellectual inferiors. The upper stream originated on Whitmore land. Water rights under the new territorial interpretation followed origin point, not prior use. The downstream properties had been operating on a courtesy basis, not a legal one. The Whitmore family, acting through their agent Harrison Cole, was prepared to offer continued access to the water at a reasonable rate. There was a fee structure on a board beside the map. Several of the men in the room had families who had been farming and ranching in Calder's Pass for 20 years. Ethan watched their faces while Cole's lawyer talked and saw the same thing move through all of them. The sick animal recognition of a thing that cannot be outrun, only absorbed. When the lawyer finished, Cole stepped forward. "I know this is difficult news," he said in the pleasant voice he used for everything. "We want to be reasonable partners in this community. We want to find arrangements that work for everyone." Ethan said from the back of the room, "What territorial interpretation are you citing?" Cole looked at him. The room looked at him. "Mr. Walker," Cole said. "Your lawyer said new territorial interpretation," Ethan said. "I want to know which one." "The Territorial Charter of 1861 established water rights by prior use and continuous occupation. I'd like to know what overrides that." Cole's lawyer cleared his throat. "There have been revisions." "I'd like to see them," Ethan said. "I don't have them here with me tonight. Then I'd like to see them before I agree to anything." Ethan looked around the room. "Any of you would, I'd think." The room was very quiet. Cole's pleasant expression had gone through several small changes in the last 30 seconds. He settled on something measured and patient. "Mr. Walker," he said, "we're not asking for agreement tonight. We're informing the community of a legal situation." "Then inform us with the legal documents," Ethan said. "A map and a fee schedule isn't legal standing. If you have the territorial revision, show it. If you don't, then tonight's meeting is about something else entirely." Cole looked at him for a long moment. "We'll get you those documents," he said. "I'll look forward to it," Ethan said. He left before the meeting formally ended, stepping out into the summer dark and untying Colt from the post, and standing with one hand on the horse's neck thinking. He had known what Harrison Cole was the moment the man rode into his yard. He understood it better now. This was not just about water rights. This was about what a man like Cole could build when he controlled the resource that everyone needed. Water. In the high country of Colorado, in the summer of 1884, water was not a convenience. It was the line between surviving and not, and he had the suspicion growing steadily, the way suspicions did when they were rooted in something real, that the claim was not as solid as the lawyer had made it sound. That Cole was counting on the men of Calder's Pass to be intimidated into acceptance before anyone thought to check. Ethan was a man who checked. He rode home in the dark and sat on his porch without a lamp and thought about what he was going to do next. And somewhere below the mountain, in the large house at the edge of the Whitmore property, Clara Whitmore was lying awake in a room full of things she had never chosen, thinking about a tin box on a shelf she'd never seen, and a man who had never once looked at her and seen a transaction. He did not sleep that night, not in the way a man fails to sleep because something is troubling him, tossing and turning and fighting the dark. Ethan Walker sat in the chair beside the cold stove and thought with the quiet, deliberate focus of a man who has learned that panic is a luxury he cannot afford, and that the only useful response to a threat is to understand it completely before deciding what to do about it. Harrison Cole was not stupid. That was the first thing to establish and hold on to. Stupid men made mistakes you could see coming. Cole had arrived in Calder's Pass with a lawyer, a map, a fee structure, and a room full of people he had already calculated would be too frightened or too tired to push back. He had done his homework. He believed he had already won. The question was whether he was right. Ethan got up before the light and pulled down every paper he owned that related to the property. The deed. The original filing with the Territorial Land Office. The water access document that had come with the property when he'd bought it from an old trapper named Gideon Cross in 1878, just months before Nora died. He spread them on the table and read every word of each one slowly, the way you read something when you know the meaning matters more than the speed. The water access was documented. Prior use continuous occupation established claim. It was not ambiguous language. It was the plain language of a territorial government that had wanted people to settle the high country and had made the terms clear enough that people would actually come. What Cole's lawyer had called a new territorial interpretation was either something that had come through very recently enough that Ethan hadn't heard of it, which was possible, or it was an invention. A bluff dressed in legal clothes presented to a room of people at 8 o'clock on a Friday evening when they were tired and worried and unlikely to go home and pull out their own documents. He needed to know which one. There was a man in Calder's Pass named August Reeves who had been a land office clerk in Denver for 15 years before his wife decided she wanted to live somewhere quieter, and he'd followed her the way men follow women they intend to keep. He ran the hardware store now and talked too much about everything, which made him exactly the kind of person that Ethan Walker usually kept at a comfortable distance. But August Reeves knew territorial law the way other men knew their own reflection, and that made him at 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning the most useful person within 30 miles. Ethan rode down the mountain before the heat got serious. August was opening the hardware store when he arrived, flipping the sign in the window with the mechanical cheerfulness of a man who genuinely enjoyed his mornings. He saw Ethan coming down the street and read something in the way he was riding, not fast, but purposeful, that straightened his expression. "Ethan," he said, "you look like a man who spent the night thinking." "I need to ask you something about water rights," Ethan said. August unlocked the door and waved him in. "Then I need coffee first. Come on." Inside, while August worked the small stove in the back room, Ethan laid out what had happened at the meeting. The map, the lawyer, the fee structure, the claim about new territorial interpretation overriding prior use. August listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When Ethan finished, he poured 2 cups and handed one over and sat on the edge of his work table. "New territorial interpretation," he said slowly. "That's what the lawyer said." "What was the lawyer's name?" "Trescott, brought down from Denver." August nodded. "I know Trescott. He's good at what he does, which is making uncertain things sound certain." He drank his coffee. "There has been discussion at the territorial level about water source rights. That's true. There's been a push from some of the larger land interests to shift the legal framework. But discussion isn't law. Nothing has passed. Nothing has changed on the books since 1861. Ethan looked at him. "He lied," Ethan said, not with anger, the same flat way he said everything. "He implied something that wasn't accurate," August said carefully, "which is a thing lawyers do that technically isn't lying, but produces the same result." He set down his cup. "Your water rights are solid, Ethan. If Cole takes this to the territorial court, he loses. But—" He paused. "He may know that, and he may be counting on nobody bothering to get that far. Because it costs money to fight it in court," Ethan said. "And time," August said. "And men who are already stretched thin don't have either." Ethan stood up. "Thank you, August," he said. "What are you going to do?" "Talk to the other landowners," Ethan said. "The ones downstream from me." "That's 6 families," August said. "I know how many it is." August studied him for a moment. "Cole's not going to like that." "No," Ethan agreed. "He's not." He finished his coffee and walked back out into the morning. He spent the rest of that Saturday riding from property to property, along the lower trail, stopping at each gate, asking to speak to whoever was home. Most of them had been at the meeting. All of them had the same look, the look of people who had been carrying something heavy for a few days and hadn't decided yet whether to set it down or fall under it. He told them what August had told him, plainly, without drama. He showed them his own documents and explained what the language meant and what it didn't mean, and he watched the same thing happen in each kitchen and each yard, the slow loosening of a knot that had been pulled tight by fear. I was not a man who spoke easily or often, but when he did speak, people tended to listen because there was nothing in his voice that suggested he was trying to get something from them. He was just telling them what was true. By the end of the day, he had spoken to all 6 families. 5 of them agreed to hold on signing anything Cole put in front of them until they'd had the water rights question looked at properly. The 6th, old Beaumont, who was 73 and had been in declining health since winter, shook his head and said he was too tired for fighting and he'd pay whatever they asked. Ethan didn't argue with him. He rode, home in the low gold light of late afternoon, an unsaddled colt, and stood in the yard for a long moment, feeling the particular exhaustion of a day that had been almost entirely made of conversation. Then he saw the horse tied at his fence. It was a good horse, A woman's horse by the saddle. Brown and quiet, cropping grass at the edge of his yard, with the patience of an animal that knew how to wait. Clara Whitmore was sitting on his porch steps. She stood when she heard Colt's hooves on the dry ground, and she turned, and Ethan looked at her, the way you look at something you weren't expecting to find in a place where it didn't belong. Her arm was still in a sling lighter than the one he'd improvised, a proper cloth one now, and she was wearing a riding dress and no jewelry, and her hair pinned back in the practical way it had been during her last days in the cabin. Not the formal arrangement she'd been wearing when her father came to collect her. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Walker," she said, and then quickly, before he could say anything else, "I know I should have written first. I know this is—" She stopped, pressed her lips together briefly. "I heard about the meeting, about the water rights." He swung down from the saddle. "How did you hear? Our housekeeper's husband was there." She watched him tie Colt to the post. "She told me what Harrison said, what his lawyer said, about your water rights." "Then you know about as much as I do," he said. "I know more than that," she said. Something in her voice made him stop moving. He looked at her. "My father's property files," she said. "I looked through them this morning. The stream that runs through our land, the upper section of it, was never registered by my family as a water source claim. Ever. The only water rights on that property are access rights for cattle, not origin ownership. Harrison is using our land to make a legal argument that our own documents don't support." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Your father knows this," he said. Something moved across her face. "I don't think Harrison told my father the full extent of what he was claiming." "Or your father knows and allowed it," Ethan said. Her jaw tightened. "I don't know," she said. "Honest. Difficult. I don't know which one it is." He looked at her. She met his gaze without flinching, even though whatever she was feeling right now was visible in every line of her face. Not weakness. He understood, but the particular honesty of someone who has decided that composure is not worth the price today. "Why are you here?" he said. "Because you helped me when you didn't have to," she said. "And now someone is using my family's name to take something from you. And I thought—" She stopped again. Started again, more direct. "I thought you deserved to know what's in those files. And I thought I should be the one to tell you." He looked at her for a long moment. "Come inside," he said. She sat at his table, the same table her father had stood across from him, at where Cole had laid his pleasant threats, and she told him everything she'd found. The property files went back to her grandfather's time, 1847, when the Whitmore land had been homesteaded before Colorado was even a territory. Every water claim was documented. All of them were downstream access claims, rights to use the water as it passed through, not rights to the origin or the flow itself. "Harrison found a gap in our registration," she said. "Our northern boundary line is vague. It was drawn in 1851 before the survey methods got precise. He's arguing that the vagueness of the boundary means the source of the stream falls within Whitmore land, and therefore the origin rights belong to us. To him technically, since he's acting as our agent in this deal." "But your own documents don't support that," Ethan said. "No, and the original survey, if anyone can find it, would show the stream source is on federal land, not ours." She looked at him steadily. "Which means Harrison's entire legal argument is built on a boundary ambiguity he manufactured by ignoring the documents that clarify it." Ethan leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. "He knew your father wouldn't look at the files closely," he said. "It wasn't a question." "My father trusts Harrison," she said quietly. He's been encouraged to trust him. For some time now." "And you?" "I read everything I'm given," she said. "Always. My father used to say it was an unfortunate quality in a woman." The faintest shadow of something passed across her face. "I've decided he was wrong about that." Ethan almost smiled. He didn't quite, but it was close enough that she noticed it. "Those documents," he said. "Can you get copies made?" "I already did," she said. She reached into the bag she'd carried in and laid a folded set of papers on the table between them. He looked at them, then at her. "You rode up here alone," he said. Yes. With cracked ribs and a dislocated arm on a mountain trail. It's healing, she said. That's not an answer. I know, she said. I rode up here alone because I didn't want anyone to know I was doing it. If Harrison found out I'd given these to you, he'd... She paused. Chose the next words carefully. He would manage the situation. That's what he does. He manages situations. By managing you, Ethan said. She looked at the table. Yes, she said. Quiet. The quietest thing she'd said since she sat down. He picked up the documents. He read through them there at the table, and she sat across from him and waited, and neither of them said anything for several minutes, and it was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. This is enough to take to the Territorial Land Office, he said. I know. Combined with the original claims from the downstream properties. I know Mr. Walker. She looked at him. That's why I brought them. He folded the papers carefully and set them on the shelf beside the tin box. He was aware in the way you become aware of things when you're trying very hard not to be that she was watching him. You're going to have trouble over this, he said, turning back, when Cole finds out. I know that too, she said. Your father, my father, she said, will be angry, and then he will look at the documents and he will understand that Harrison was using our family's name for something we didn't agree to and didn't know the full truth of. She sat straight in the chair, her injured arm resting in its sling, her face composed. My father is a hard man in some ways, but he is not dishonest. When he understands what Harrison actually did, he will not stand behind it. You sure about that? Ethan said. She wasn't, and they both knew it. He could see the uncertainty under the certainty she was presenting, but he didn't say so. No, she said after a moment. Not entirely. He appreciated that. I'll take these to August Reeves, he said. He was a land office clerk. He knows how to file the challenge properly. Good, she said. She stood. He stood. Miss Whitmore, he said. You didn't have to do this. She looked at him. No, she said. I didn't. And she left it there exactly like that without explanation, which told him more than if she had explained it. He walked out to help her onto her horse, and she didn't argue against the help for once, and he watched her ride back down the mountain trail in the late afternoon heat, thinking that he had been wrong 3 days ago when he'd thought the letter would be the end of it. The next 2 weeks moved fast and sideways the way trouble usually does. August Reeves took one look at the documents and let out a long, low whistle that he followed with 17 minutes of technical analysis that Ethan absorbed carefully, and that came down to this. Cole's claim was not just weak, it was fraudulent. The original boundary survey, which August located in the county records with the focused energy of a man who had spent 15 years knowing exactly where things were filed, showed the stream source on federal land. Not Whitmore land. Not anyone's private land. Federal, which meant the territorial water rights statute applied in full and prior use claims held. Cole had either known this and buried it, or had not looked closely enough to find it, which was its own kind of dishonesty. Either way, August said, spreading papers across the hardware store counter. If you take this to the Territorial Commissioner's office in Denver, Cole's claim dissolves. Entirely. How long does that take? Ethan said. Fast track given the number of parties affected 4 weeks, maybe 6. And in the meantime, Cole can't legally compel anyone to pay him. He can threaten, he can pressure, but he can't legally enforce. August looked at him over the papers. The problem is that people under enough pressure tend to pay things they don't legally owe. Ethan thought about old Beaumont, who was too tired to fight. I'll go to Denver, he said. That's 3 days' ride, August said. I know how far Denver is. August studied him. This is going to cost you time away from the property. Yes. And money. Some. And Cole is going to find out you did it, and he's going to... August, Ethan said. I know. August closed his mouth, opened it again. I'll write you a letter of introduction. Commissioner's office knows my name. I appreciate it, Ethan said. He rode home and packed what he needed and made arrangements with his nearest neighbor, a quiet man named Harker, who ran goats and never asked questions to check on the cattle while he was gone. He was planning to leave at first light. He was in the middle of writing a note to leave on his own table, the property habit of a man who lived alone and liked things in order when he heard hooves on the trail again. His hand went still on the pen. 2 riders this time. He knew one of the horses before he could see the men, Cole's gray distinctive. Cole came into the yard with a man Ethan hadn't seen before. Younger, with watchful eyes, and the kind of still hands that suggested he was comfortable with the weight of what was on his hip. "Mr. Walker," Cole said, pleasantly, always pleasantly. "I was hoping to find you in." "Here I am," Ethan said from the porch, not moving down the steps. "I've heard some things," Cole said, "about conversations you've been having, about the water rights matter." "I talked to my neighbors," Ethan said. "They're my neighbors. That's not unusual." "I've also heard," Cole said, the pleasantness thinning the way ice thins when the weight on it gets serious, "that someone has been going through the Whitmore family's property documents." Ethan said nothing. "Sharing information from those documents," Cole said, "with third parties. That would be a matter between the Whitmore family and whoever they chose to share their own documents with," Ethan said. Cole looked at him. "You know what I think, Mr. Walker? I expect you're going to tell me. I think you're a man who made a decent gesture and let it go to his head." Cole's voice had dropped the pleasantness entirely now, like a coat he'd decided wasn't worth the weight. "You pulled a woman out of a ditch. That was good. But you are overestimating what that entitles you to. You are a poor cowboy on a small piece of land in the mountains. You have no allies worth counting, no resources worth worrying about, and no legal standing that I cannot outlast." "Is that so?" Ethan said. "You could make this very simple," Cole said. "Sign the water access agreement. Encourage your neighbors to do the same. Everyone moves forward. There's no unpleasantness." "And if I ride to Denver and file a challenge with the territorial commissioner?" Ethan said. The silence that followed that was a specific kind of silence. The kind that comes after something has been confirmed that one person hoped the other person didn't know. Cole recovered quickly. He was good at that. "Then you waste your time and your money, and you still end up with an agreement," he said. "Just later and harder." Or, Ethan said, "the challenge holds and your claim dissolves, and the 6 families on this mountain keep the water rights they've held for 20 years. Cole looked at him for a long moment. "You're making an enemy," he said, not threatening, just stating a fact the way a weatherman states the weather. "I've had enemies before," Ethan said. "Not like me," Cole said. "Probably not," Ethan agreed. "But here's the thing about men like you, Mr. Cole. You count on other people being afraid of the size of the problem. You count on them doing the math and deciding it's easier to give you what you want than to fight you." He looked at Cole steadily. "I did the math. I came out on the other side." Cole said nothing. "I'll be in Denver in 3 days," Ethan said. "Good evening." I went back inside and closed the door and stood in the dark of the cabin and listened to the hooves moving off the property, and he breathed carefully, and he was aware that his hands were not entirely steady, and he stood there until they were. He left for Denver at first light. He did not know as he rode down the mountain trail with August's letter in his coat pocket and the Whitmore documents wrapped in oilcloth in his saddlebag that Clara Whitmore had spent the 2 days since she'd left his porch having a series of conversations with her father that would have unsettled any man who believed things were going to resolve quietly. He did not know that Clara had laid the documents on her father's desk and walked him through each one with the same careful patience he'd used with his neighbors, and that her father had sat very still through all of it, and that at the end he had asked for Harrison Cole to come to the house that evening. He did not know that the meeting between Whitmore and Cole had lasted 2 hours and ended with raised voices that the housekeeper could hear from 2 rooms away, and that Cole had ridden away from the Whitmore house that night without the standing he'd arrived with. He did not know any of that. What he knew was the road ahead of him and the documents in his saddlebag and the weight of what needed to be done. 3 days to Denver. However long the filing took. 3 days back. He settled into the ride, The way he settled into everything with the patient, forward-facing focus of a man who has no use for looking back at what he's already left. How was one day's ride out of Denver when Clara Whitmore did something that changed everything. She had spent the morning answering her father's questions carefully, one at a time, about what she had found and what she had decided to do with it. Her father listened with the particular stillness of a man who is revising something large inside himself, something that had been settled and was now not settled anymore. "You gave those documents to Walker," he said. It was not an accusation. It was something else harder to name. "Yes," she said. "Why?" he said. And she told him the truth. All of it. The creek bed. The cabin. The way he had looked at her, not at her name, not at her family's land, not at whatever strategic value might attach to saving the right person. The letter she had written. The way she had felt reading his lack of response, and the fact that she had understood his silence better than she understood most men's words. Her father listened to all of it. When she was done, he was quiet for a long time. "Clara," he said finally, "you understand what you're saying?" "Yes," she said. "Harrison was my choice for you," he said. "Not because He stopped. Tried again. "I thought he was what you needed. Stable. Established. Someone who understood how to protect what we've built." "He understood how to use it," she said, gently. As gently as she could, because this was her father, and she loved him, and she knew this was costing him something. "There's a difference." Her father looked at the documents spread across his desk. He looked at his hands. "You rode up that mountain alone," he said, "with cracked ribs." "Yes." "To give documents to a man you've known for 5 days." "Yes." Because she thought about how to answer that. She had been thinking about how to answer that for 2 weeks. She thought about a man kneeling beside her in the dirt with rough hands that moved carefully. About coffee left on the stove. About a letter written on paper that cost more than his dinner, and answered with silence that was somehow not unkind. About a room full of frightened neighbors being told what was true without anyone asking them to be grateful for it. "Because he's honest," she said. "And because honest is rarer than I thought it was." Her father looked at her. "You love him," he said. She didn't answer that, which was its own kind of answer, and they both knew it. Ethan filed the challenge with the Territorial Commissioner's office on a Wednesday morning in Denver, and it took 4 hours and 3 different clerks and a conversation with a deputy commissioner who turned out to know August Reeves personally, and at the end of it, he had a receipt of filing and a date stamp and a case number that meant the water rights of 6 families in Calder's Pass were now officially a matter of territorial record. He stood on the street outside the commissioner's building in the Denver heat, and felt the specific exhaustion that comes after a thing you have been holding in your body for 2 weeks finally has somewhere to go. He bought a meal at a counter diner and ate it without tasting it, and started making arrangements to head back north. He was at the stables saddling Colt for the return trip when a telegraph boy found him. "Mr. Walker, Ethan Walker." He took the paper. It was from August Reeves. Short. The way August was never short about anything, which meant he had made himself be brief because the content was urgent. "Cole has made a move on Beaumont's property. Old man signed under pressure. Claims he can extend from there. Come back quick. Not just water anymore." Ethan read it twice. Then he folded it into his coat pocket beside the filing receipt and swung up onto Colt. The ride back was 2 days faster than the ride out because he pushed harder, and Colt, who was a good horse and knew when to match his rider's urgency, matched it without complaint. He came back into Calder's Pass on a Friday evening, tired and trail-dusted, and thinking 4 steps ahead, and the first person he saw when he rode down the main street was Clara Whitmore. She was coming out of the general store. She had her arm out of the sling, still careful with it, still holding it slightly close to her body, and she had a parcel under her other arm, and she stopped when she saw him, and for a moment neither of them did anything. Then she said across the distance, "Did you file it?" "Filed," he said. Something moved across her face that she didn't entirely hide. Relief and something else below it. "Cole moved on Beaumont," she said. "I know. August telegraphed me." "My father cut ties with Harrison," she said. 2 days ago, formally, in writing. He looked at her. "Your father did that," he said. "He did?" she said. With some encouragement. From me. He held her gaze. The street was not empty. There were people moving around them doing their Friday evening business, and he was aware of some of them watching because this was Calder's Pass, and they had been watching him and this woman since she'd first been carried down from his mountain. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Walker," she said. "You've been busy." "So have you," she said. He almost smiled. He caught it the way he usually did. But she saw, and something in her face went quiet and certain in a way that made him look away first. "We need to talk about Beaumont," he said. "Yes," she said. "We do. I need to get Colt settled and eat something. Can you give me an hour?" "I can give you an hour," she said. He rode to the livery. He ate at the counter diner and did not taste the food. He thought about a telegraph message and an old man too tired to fight, and the gap in the property line where Cole was now trying to put down a root. He thought about Clara Whitmore standing in the middle of a street telling him her father had cut ties with Harrison Cole. He thought about the look on her face when she said it. Not triumphant, not relieved exactly, just steady. The way she had been steady in the cabin with her arms set and her ribs cracked and her face turned toward the ceiling, breathing through things that hurt without making it anyone else's problem. He thought about that, and then he set it aside because he had learned in 6 years of solitude that the things you let yourself think about had a way of growing into the shape of whatever you kept in the dark, and there were some shapes he could not afford. He went to meet her. He came back from the mountain on a Tuesday morning, and nobody in Calder's Pass said a word to him directly. That was how he knew it had gotten bad while he was gone. The ride down from the high country had taken him 3 hours, and in those 3 hours he had rehearsed nothing and planned nothing, and simply let the trail carry him the way it always did, with Colt moving steady underneath him and the summer heat pressing down from a sky that had forgotten what clouds were. He had been gone 11 days. 11 days since the hearing in front of Commissioner Aldridge. 11 days since he had stood in that room and said the things that needed saying and watched Cole's lawyer try to rebuild an argument that had already fallen through its own floor. He had thought riding back that the worst of it was over. He had been wrong before. He was wrong again. August Reeves met him at the edge of town with the look of a man who had been watching the road and was not surprised to see him and was not happy about what he had to say. "Walk with me," August said. They walked Colt down the side street away from the main road, and August talked low and fast, the way he only talked when things were serious enough to make him stop enjoying the sound of his own voice. Cole had not gone quietly. In the 11 days since the hearing, he had done 3 things. First, he had retained a second lawyer, not Trescott, who had apparently decided this particular battle was not worth his reputation, but a man named Garfield out of Colorado Springs, who had a different kind of expertise. Not land law, contract law. Second, he had called in a personal favor from a territorial assemblyman named Pruitt, who owed Cole's family money going back to his father's time, and Pruitt had sent a letter to Commissioner Aldridge suggesting that the original filing might benefit from additional review. Third, and this was the part that made August's voice go flat and careful, he had started a different kind of campaign in Calder's Pass itself. Not legal, personal. "What kind of personal?" Ethan said. "The kind that uses what people already half believe and makes it into something they'll repeat as fact," August said. "He's been saying you falsified the documents, that the copies Clara gave you were altered before you filed them." Ethan stopped walking. "He's saying I committed fraud," he said. "He's implying it," August said. "Carefully, to the right people, men who sit on the county board, men who have reason to want Cole to succeed with his water scheme, men who will carry the story without putting their names to it." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "And the Whitmore documents," he said. "The originals." August looked at him. "That's the other thing. Cole's lawyer sent a letter to Whitmore 2 days ago demanding the original files be turned over as evidence in a potential fraud investigation, claiming they're material to a legal matter. Can he do that? He can demand it. Whether Whitmore complies is another question." Ethan thought about that. About Clara, who had ridden up a mountain with cracked ribs to bring him documents that could now be used against her, if her father handed them over to the wrong person. "Where's Clara now?" he said. "At the house," August said. "Her father has had lawyers of his own in since Monday. He paused. "It's not calm over there." Ethan tied Colt at August's post and went inside the hardware store and stood at the window for a moment, thinking with the quiet, focused effort of a man who is trying to see several moves ahead on a board that keeps changing shape. Cole was scared. That was the thing to hold on to. A man who was winning did not start a fraud campaign. He did not call in political favors and hire a second lawyer and spend 11 days fighting something he'd already lost in front of a commissioner. He did all of that because he knew the legal ground was gone, and he was trying to find a different kind of ground. Murkier ground. The kind where truth was harder to establish because it was competing with enough noise to confuse people who weren't paying close attention, and the fraud claim that was specifically designed for one person. Not the commissioner, not the court. Ethan Walker. Because a fraud accusation against a poor mountain cowboy in a territory where people already believed that men without money had hidden motivations was the kind of thing that could follow a man for years without ever being proven or disproven. It would just sit there in the minds of everyone who heard it, making every honest thing he'd done look like it might have been something else. He understood what Cole was doing. He needed to move before Cole finished doing it. "I need to see Clara," he said. August looked at him steadily. "That might make things worse." "Things are already worse," Ethan said. "I need to see her." He did not ride to the Whitmore house. He sent a message through the housekeeper's husband, who worked at the livery, and was a quiet man who Ethan had done small favors for over the years without keeping track of them. The message was simple. He needed to speak with Miss Whitmore at her earliest convenience on a matter of some urgency, and if she could meet him at August's store rather than the house, it would be better for both of them. She came within the hour. She came alone, which surprised him, and she came with the particular energy of someone who has been coiled tight for several days and is holding it together through the discipline of habit rather than ease. She walked into August's back room, where Ethan was waiting, and looked at him and said without preamble, "You heard." "This morning," he said. "August met me at the edge of town." "Cole's lawyer wants the originals," she said. "I know. My father he's conflicted." She sat down in the chair August had vacated, and she sat straight the way she always sat, the spine that never quite gave in to whatever was pressing on it. "He knows what Harrison did. He understands it. But he also—" She stopped. "He spent 30 years building something. And now he's being told that holding on to what's right might cost him a legal battle that drains everything he's built to defend it." "And Cole knows that," Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "He knows it exactly. He calculated it." Her voice was flat and clear, not emotional. The flatness of someone who has already been through the emotional part and come out the other side into something harder and more useful. "Harrison is very good at knowing exactly how much pressure to apply and where." "What does your father want to do?" She looked at him. "He wants me to tell him what to do, which is—" She almost laughed, a brief and humorless thing. "He has never once in my life asked me what I thought about a significant decision. And now, when everything is complicated and I'm in the middle of it, he is asking me to lead." "What do you want to tell him?" Ethan said. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, Calder's Pass went about its business in the summer heat, entirely unaware that a conversation in a hardware store backroom was going to determine the shape of things for the next several years. "I want to tell him to hold the originals," she said. "To refuse the demand. To stand beside the filing you made in Denver and let the commissioner's ruling stand." "That's the right answer," Ethan said. "I know it's the right answer," she said. "But it's also the answer that costs him something." She looked at her hands. "And it's easy for me to say it. It's not my 30 years. He looked at her. He had in the days since he'd left for Denver thought about her more than he intended to and less than he'd feared. He had thought about the way she said things plainly when plainness cost her something. The way she had walked into the commissioner's hearing. He had seen her arrive late, slipping into the back of the room with her father beside her, and he had not let himself look at her for more than a moment, because there was too much else happening, and she was a complication he had no useful response to. "Clara," he said. She looked up. He almost never used her given name. The shift in it registered in her face. "Your father's 30 years built something worth protecting," he said. "Handing those documents to Cole doesn't protect it. It dismantles it. Because once Cole has legal claim to the water rights, he doesn't need your family's cooperation anymore. He has the resource. He has the territory. He has the leverage." He paused. "Your father built an empire on land and water. If Cole controls the water, your father's land is just dirt." She held his gaze. "Say that to him," she said, quietly. "Not me. I know it. Say it to him." "You want me to come to the house?" he said. "Yes," she said. He thought about August's warning, about the fraud claim hanging in the air like smoke, about what it looked like a poor mountain cowboy meeting privately with the wealthiest family in the territory, whose daughter had been alone in his cabin for 4 days, and had since been riding up mountains to bring him documents, and now was asking him to come to the house. He thought about how Cole would use that. Then he thought about 6 families losing their water, about old Beaumont, who had already been pressured into signing, about a legal challenge in Denver that could still be undermined if the Whitmore documents were handed over and declared altered. "I'll come tonight," he said. The Whitmore house was nothing like his cabin. He had known that without seeing it the way you know things about the world when you've been paying attention to it long enough. But knowing and seeing were different, and he stood at the gate for a moment before going through it. Not because he was intimidated, but because he was taking inventory. This was the life Clara had been born into. These grounds, this house, the particular solidity of a place that had been built to last, and had lasted. And she had ridden away from it up a mountain trail with cracked ribs to bring documents to a man her world had already decided was beneath consideration. He had tried not to think about what that meant. He thought about it anyway. Thomas Whitmore met him in the front room. He was standing when Ethan came in, which told Ethan something about how the man had prepared himself for this conversation. A man who sits is a man at ease, or a man performing ease. A man who stands is a man who has not yet decided what he thinks. "Mr. Walker," Whitmore said. "Mr. Whitmore," Ethan said. He held his hat in both hands. Not deference, just habit. Clara was there too, sitting to the side, and she did not speak, and he did not look at her, because this conversation needed to be between the 2 men, and she understood that the same way she understood most things instinctively without being told. "You filed the challenge in Denver," Whitmore said. "I did. Using documents from my property files." "Using documents your daughter provided," Ethan said. "Voluntarily, because they demonstrated that the legal claim being made in your family's name was not supported by your own records." Whitmore looked at him. "You understand what Cole is now claiming about those documents?" "I understand what he's implying," Ethan said. "He's implying I altered them, which I didn't, which your own originals will confirm the moment anyone with credentials and no prior interest looks at them side by side. And if I turn the originals over to Cole's lawyer, then Cole's lawyer controls when and how they're examined," Ethan said. "And by whom, and what the findings are called." He paused, kept his voice level. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your own property files. But I'll tell you what I know. The challenge is filed. The commissioner's ruling is on record. What Cole is doing right now is not a legal strategy. It's a delay strategy. He's trying to muddy the water long enough that your neighbors on this mountain give up and pay him because they're exhausted." Whitmore was quiet. "If the originals stay with you," Ethan continued, "and you bring them to Commissioner Aldridge's office yourself in person, with your own lawyer present. Not Cole's, not mine, yours. Then there's no gap for Cole to manufacture a story in. The documents speak for themselves. Your family's name is cleared, and the water rights stand." Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. "You've thought about this carefully," he said. "I've had several days of hard writing to think," Ethan said. Something shifted in Whitmore's face. Not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to respect, which in a man like Whitmore probably felt the same. "My daughter," Whitmore said. He stopped. Ethan waited. "She said some things to me," Whitmore said. "About you. About the kind of man she believes you to be." Ethan said nothing. "I'm going to ask you a direct question," Whitmore said, "and I'd like a direct answer." "All right," Ethan said. "Do you have feelings for my daughter?" The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something that changes the shape of a conversation permanently. Ethan looked at Thomas Whitmore. He thought about every careful, deliberate thing he had done over the past weeks to keep a specific distance. He thought about a letter in a tin box, about a woman standing in the street asking if he'd filed it, about the way she had said honest is rarer than I thought it was, and looked away, as if the saying of it had cost her something she hadn't budgeted for. "Yes," he said. He said it the way he said everything. Flat, plain, true. Whitmore absorbed that. "And you said nothing," Whitmore said. "You have done everything you have done in this situation, the documents Denver, the challenge coming here tonight, and said nothing." "It wasn't relevant to what needed doing," Ethan said. Whitmore looked at him for a long time. Then he sat down, which meant Ethan thought that he had decided something. "Sit down, Mr. Walker," Whitmore said. Ethan sat. From the corner of the room, Clara made a small sound. He still did not look at her, but he felt the shift in the room, the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. "I'll take the documents to Denver myself," Whitmore said. "This week. My lawyer will accompany me. We'll request a direct examination in front of Aldridge." "That's the right move," Ethan said. "I know it is," Whitmore said. He looked tired. The specific tiredness of a man who has been holding something heavy and has only now figured out how to put it down. "I should have seen what Harrison was doing earlier. He stopped. "I wanted to believe he was what I thought he was." "People generally do," Ethan said, without judgment, just truth. Whitmore nodded once. He stood again. "I'll see you out, Mr. Walker," he said. "And I expect we'll speak again after Denver." "I expect so," Ethan said. He stood and put his hat on and turned toward the door, and Clara said from the corner of the room quietly and clearly, "Ethan." He stopped. He turned. She was standing now. She was looking at him with the direct, unguarded look she only used when she had decided that composure was less important than the thing she needed to say. "Thank you," she said. The same words she had used in the cabin. Different weight. Different everything. He held her gaze for one moment only. "Take care of that arm," he said, and he walked out. Thomas Whitmore rode to Denver 4 days later. He brought his own lawyer, a man named Calloway, who had handled Whitmore family matters for 12 years, and who had, upon being shown the property documents and the water rights filing, and the letter from Cole's lawyer, expressed his professional opinion in language that was not usually associated with legal counsel. The examination took 2 days. Commissioner Aldridge had seen enough manufactured disputes in 30 years of territorial administration to recognize one on sight, and what he saw when he put the original Whitmore documents beside the filed copies was identical. Not similar. Identical. Cole's fraud claim dissolved before it was ever formally filed. Ethan heard this from August, who heard it from the housekeeper's husband, who had heard it from Whitmore's own mouth when the man returned from Denver and stopped at the general store on his way home. He heard it on a Thursday afternoon. I was mending a saddle on his porch. He set the saddle down and looked at the mountains for a while. It was not over. He understood that. Cole still had the assemblyman's pressure and the second lawyer and Beaumont's signed agreement, which would have to be unwound separately. There were still 3 or 4 weeks of legal process ahead before the commissioner's ruling became fully enforceable. But the fraud claim was gone. The documents were confirmed. The challenge was standing. He picked up the saddle and went back to work. Cole came to him directly 3 days after Whitmore returned from Denver. Not with 2 riders this time. Alone. Which was either a very confident move or a man who had run out of performances and had only 1 card left to play. He rode up to the yard and did not get off his horse. "Mr. Walker," he said. "Mr. Cole," Ethan said. He was standing in the yard, not the porch. He had seen Cole coming from 50 yards out and walked down to meet him because he had always found it better to handle things in the open. Cole looked different. Not broken. Men like Cole didn't break in any way you could see. But the pleasantness was gone entirely now, stripped off like paint in weather, and what was underneath it was a man who was calculating his remaining options and finding them limited. "I want to make you an offer," Cole said. "I'm listening," Ethan said. "Drop the challenge. Withdraw the Denver filing. I'll compensate you fairly enough to expand your property, buy good stock, fix whatever needs fixing on this place." He paused. "And I'll leave you alone. Entirely." Ethan looked at him. "What about the other 5 families?" he said. "That's not your concern." "I'm making it my concern," Ethan said. "The filing covers 6 properties, Mr. Cole, not 1. Cole's jaw tightened slightly. "I can offer reasonable terms to the others." "They have their own terms," Ethan said. "Established under territorial law, prior use, continuous occupation. They don't need your reasonable terms. They need you to drop the claim." "That's not something I'm prepared to do," Cole said. "Then there's nothing to talk about," Ethan said. Cole looked at him. And in that look was something Ethan recognized. Not anger, not calculation, but the particular frustration of a man who cannot understand why someone isn't behaving like money, like power, like threat. "You're making your life very difficult," Cole said, "for people who would not do the same for you." "Maybe," Ethan said. "But I don't do things for people because I expect the same back. I do them because they're right." "That's a philosophy for poor men," Cole said. "It's a philosophy for honest ones," Ethan said, "which is a different category entirely." Cole looked at him for one more long moment. Then he gathered his reins. "This isn't finished," he said. "No." Ethan agreed. "Not yet, but it will be." Cole rode away. Ethan watched him go without moving. Then he heard footsteps on the trail behind the cabin. Footsteps he had not heard approaching, because Cole's arrival had taken his full attention, and he turned. Clara was there. She had come up the back trail, the quieter one, and she was standing at the edge of the yard with a look on her face that told him she had heard every word. "You knew I was here," she said. "I heard your horse," he said. 20 minutes ago." "And you didn't say anything?" "I thought you might have come for a reason," he said. "That wasn't my conversation to interrupt." She walked forward slowly into the yard and stopped about 6 feet from him. The summer heat was pressing down hard, and the light was that specific afternoon gold that made everything look like it was on the edge of something. "My father is going to withdraw formally from Cole's partnership," she said. "In writing, filed at the county office. It means the water claim loses its last legitimate sponsor." "When?" Ethan said. "Monday," she said. "Calloway is drawing up the papers." He nodded. He should have felt relief. He did feel relief. But there was something else sitting on top of it, something that had been building for weeks, and he was aware the same way he'd been aware of Cole's rider at 50 yards, that it was about to arrive, whether he was ready for it or not. "That ends it," he said. Formally. "Yes," she said. "Then you don't have a reason to come up the mountain anymore," he said. It wasn't a dismissal. He didn't mean it as one. But he watched her hear it, and he watched something flicker behind her eyes, quick and controlled, and she looked at the ground for 1 second before looking back up. "No," she said. "I suppose not." He looked at her. He had told her father the truth because Thomas Whitmore had asked him directly, and he was not a man who lied to direct questions. But saying a thing to a father and saying it to the person herself were 2 different things in a way he had not fully calculated. "Clara," he said. "Ethan," she said. And the fact that she used his name, first name, no title, felt like a door opening. "I said something to your father," he said. "When he asked me directly." "I know," she said. "He told me." "Then you know what I said?" "Yes," she said. "I know what you said." He looked at her. 6 feet of summer air between them and 11 weeks of things. Neither of them had said clearly, and the mountains behind her going gold in the afternoon light, and Colt somewhere near the fence, watching them both with the disinterested patience of a horse who had seen his rider do harder things than this. "I'm not going to tell you it makes sense," he said. "I know what I have and what I don't have. I know the difference between your life and mine." "I know the difference too," she said. "I'm not offering you anything that looks like what you grew up in," he said. "I know that," she said. "And I'm not asking you to." "Ethan." Her voice stopped him, firm, not unkind, just certain in the way she was certain when she'd decided something. "I rode up a mountain with cracked ribs. I went through my father's files at 7 in the morning. I stood in the back of a government hearing room in Denver for 2 hours. She paused. "What do you think I was doing?" He was quiet. "I know what you are," she said. "I knew it the first day I opened my eyes in that cabin, and you were standing at the window with a cup of coffee, looking at the mountain like it owed you something." Something shifted in her voice. Not softer, deeper. "You did not look at me the way men look at me. You looked at me like I was a person in your house who needed to not die. And I thought I have never in my life been looked at like that." He said nothing. He was not a man with the right words for a moment like this one. He had always known that about himself. "I'm not asking for permission," she said. "I'm not asking you to change your life. I'm telling you." She stopped, breathed, looked at him with the look that she only used when she'd decided that composure wasn't worth the price. "I'm telling you that I am here because I want to be here, not because my father says, not because it's practical, not because you saved my life though you did." She took one step forward. One. "Because when I think about the kind of person I want to be, I keep thinking about the kind of person you already are." The yard was very quiet. Somewhere down the mountain, the wind was moving through the scrub oak, and Colt shifted his weight at the fence, and the summer heat held everything in a stillness that felt like the world waiting. Ethan looked at her. "I thought about Nora, the way he always did, when something good threatened to arrive. Not to compare, not to mourn, but the way you think about a door that used to be a door and is now a wall, and the fact that a different door in a different wall doesn't make the first one less real." He thought about 6 years of mornings on a mountain working and sleeping and breathing, and how he had convinced himself that was enough, because enough was all he was allowed. He took one step forward. He said, "I'm not easy to live alongside, I know that." "I'm not easy to live alongside either," she said. "Ask anyone." And he almost smiled. And this time he let it happen. It was small, brief, but it was there, and she saw it, and something in her face went quiet in the particular way of someone who has just gotten the thing they wanted without expecting to get it. He didn't say anything romantic. He didn't have those words. What he did was look at her, really look the way he hadn't let himself look since the creek bed, since the cabin, since the letter in the tin box, and let her see him looking. "All right," he said. 2 words. But she heard everything in them. "All right," she said back. And that was enough. For 2 people who had spent 11 weeks saying everything by saying almost nothing, it was more than enough. Monday came, and Thomas Whitmore filed his formal withdrawal from Harrison Cole's partnership at the county office in Calder's Pass. Calloway served the withdrawal papers to Cole's lawyer that afternoon. The lawyer read them, asked 2 questions, received 2 answers, and packed his case. He was on the road back to Colorado Springs before sundown. Cole himself did not appear. He had checked out of his lodgings at the hotel that morning, and nobody saw him leave, and the general consensus in Calder's Pass, spoken in the way of people who have been holding something uncomfortable and are relieved to set it down, was that he had simply calculated his odds and chosen to go. The commissioner's ruling came through 3 weeks later. The water rights of the 6 downstream properties were confirmed under prior use, and continuous occupation, effective and uncontested. The fee structure Cole had put on this board in the town hall was null. Beaumont's signed agreement was voided by the commissioner's office on the grounds that it had been obtained through misrepresentation of legal standing. Old Beaumont, when August Reeves rode out to tell him personally, sat on his porch for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "I'm too old to be grateful properly. But tell Walker I know what he did." August told him. Ethan nodded once and went back to his fence line. But the thing about Calder's Pass, the thing that was beginning to shift in small but visible ways, was that the town was doing its own kind of recalculation. The story had moved through the valley, the way stories always moved, filling every gap, touching every corner. a poor mountain cowboy who had asked nothing for saving the richest woman in the territory, who had refused payment twice, who had ridden to Denver and filed a legal challenge on behalf of 6 families who hadn't asked him to, who had walked into a powerful man's compound and said what was true without apology and without softening it for the comfort of the room, and who had done all of it, every piece of it, without ever appearing to want anything in return. People remembered that. It settled in differently than they expected, like water into dry ground. Garvey at the feed store did not make any particular speech about it. He just started giving Ethan proper eye contact when he came in, which was its own kind of statement in a man of Garvey's constitution. A woman who had crossed the street to avoid him stopped one afternoon to say her husband had land bordering Beaumonts, and they were grateful. She didn't stay long, but she stopped. These were not large things, but they were real, and Ethan noticed them the way he noticed most things, quietly, without comment, filing them in the place where he kept what mattered. Clara noticed them too. She came up the mountain twice more that week, and both times her father knew she was going and said nothing, which was its own kind of change. The second time she brought a book she'd thought he might like, a collection of territorial survey records with historical notes, and she was right, he did like it, and they sat on his porch in the late afternoon talking about Colorado history, with the easy naturalness of 2 people who have discovered they are interested in the same things and are still slightly surprised by it. He walked her to her horse when she left. At the gate, she turned. "My father asked me something," she said. "What did he ask?" "He asked if you had intentions." She looked at him steadily. "Official ones." Ethan looked at her. He thought about the word intentions and about the weight of it, and about the fact that he had a property with a second room that still sat empty, and a tin box on a shelf that held the important things, and a horse who knew every trail in these mountains. "Do I have time to think about how to say that properly?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she did something he hadn't heard in 11 weeks. She laughed. A real one, unguarded, the kind that had surprised him that first time on the cot, and surprised him again now. "You have some time," she said. "Not a lot." "Noted," he said. She rode away down the mountain, and he stood at the gate until she was out of sight, and then he stood there a little longer, because standing there a little longer had become a habit, and habits in his experience were usually trying to tell you something. He thought about it for 4 days, not because he was uncertain. He had not been uncertain since the afternoon in the yard when she had told him what she was doing on a mountain with cracked ribs, and he had looked at her and said all right, and meant more by it than he'd said. He was certain. He had been certain for longer than he was comfortable admitting even to himself. I thought about it because he was a man who did not do things halfway, and saying what he intended to say to Thomas Whitmore was not a thing he was going to do halfway. He wanted to know what he was walking into that house with, not just the feeling, the shape of it, what he was offering and what he was asking, and whether those 2 things were honest enough to say out loud. What he was offering was not large by any standard the Whitmore family had been measuring against. He had the property, 40 acres on the north side of Calder's Pass, clear title, water rights confirmed. He had the cattle. He had the cabin, which needed a new roof on the second room, and had needed it for 2 years, because there had been no reason to fix a room nobody used. He had 6 years of knowing this mountain well enough to work it through any season, and the knowledge that the land would produce if you gave it what it needed and didn't expect more from it than it could give. What he was asking was something a man in his position had no obvious right to ask from a family in theirs. He knew that. He sat with it. He turned it over the way you turn a stone to see what's underneath. And what he kept coming back to was not the imbalance. It was her voice in the yard saying, "I am here because I want to be here." And the way she said it, not pleading, not performing, just stating a fact with the same flat certainty he used when he said true things about fence lines and territorial law. She was not a woman who said things she didn't mean. He had understood that about her in the first 48 hours when she'd held still for a dislocated arm being set without making a sound, and then asked the right questions after. On the 4th day, he saddled Colt and rode down the mountain. Thomas Whitmore was in the yard when he arrived, which was either coincidence or the man had been expecting him, and Ethan suspected the latter. Whitmore watched him come through the gate and dismount and tie Colt without saying anything, and then he said, Mr. Walker, in the voice of a man who has already composed the room he's about to walk into. Mr. Whitmore, Ethan said. I'd like to speak with you. I thought you might, Whitmore said. Come inside. They sat in the same front room as before. Clara was not there, which meant Whitmore had arranged it that way, which meant the conversation Ethan had come to have was one the older man had already prepared himself for. Ethan held his hat in his hands. He did not look at the floor. He looked at Thomas Whitmore directly the way he looked at everything. I want to be honest with you, he said. I'd expect nothing else from you at this point, Whitmore said. I don't have what you'd consider a suitable position, Ethan said. I have land and cattle and a clear legal standing on this mountain. I have a good reputation, which is a recent development, and I'm aware of why it happened, and that it wouldn't have happened without what your family did in Denver. He paused. I can't offer Clara the life she grew up in. I won't pretend otherwise, and I won't promise things I can't build. Whitmore looked at him steadily. What can you build? He said. Something solid, Ethan said. Something honest. Something that doesn't depend on who her father is or what my bank account says, because it'll be built on what we both put into it. He stopped. Then because he had decided honesty was the only currency he had in this room. I know she's thought about this carefully. She's not a woman who does anything without thinking it carefully. I trust her judgment. I'm asking you to trust it too. The room was very quiet. Whitmore looked at him for a long time. The kind of long time that in another man might have felt like power, but in Whitmore felt like something more honest. A man actually thinking, actually deciding, not performing consideration. My wife would have liked you, Whitmore said. Ethan waited. She was a practical woman, Whitmore continued. She cared very little about appearances, and a great deal about whether a man did what he said he would. He was quiet for a moment. Clara takes after her, which is not always convenient, but it is consistently correct. Ethan looked at him. Is that a yes? He said. Whitmore almost smiled. A small thing contained but there. It is not a no, he said. The rest is between you and my daughter. Ethan nodded once. He stood. She's in the garden, Whitmore said. She's been in the garden for 2 hours, which is not something she does normally. Ethan understood what that meant. He put his hat on and walked through the house and out the back and found her. She was not gardening. She was standing at the edge of the garden with her arms crossed and the posture of someone who had been waiting and was now trying to look like she had not been waiting, and when she heard his footsteps, she turned. She read his face before he said anything. He watched her read it. He said yes, she said. He said it was not a no, Ethan said. She stared at him. I thought it was encouraging, Ethan said. She pressed her lips together. He could see her trying not to smile and losing the effort. Ethan Walker, she said. Did you come here to ask my father something? I did, he said. And now you're going to tell me what you told him. I'm going to ask you something different, he said. What I told him was about what I can offer. What I'm asking you is whether you want it. She looked at him, uncrossed her arms. The trying not to smile had resolved itself into something quieter and more certain. Yes, she said. Flat, plain. The way he said true things. He looked at her. Then I'd like to do this properly, he said, when I have the ring situation sorted. I don't need a ring, she said. I know you don't need one, he said. I'd like to get you one anyway. She held his gaze. Something moved behind her eyes, the thing she usually kept managed and composed, the thing she had shown him in pieces since the creek bed, but all at once, now unguarded and clear. All right, she said. 2 words. The same 2 words he'd used in the yard. Her giving them back to him now with the same weight felt like something completing a circuit. I took 1 step forward and took her hand carefully. The one that had been injured, fully healed now, but still the one he reached for, and held it for a moment. And that was enough. For 2 people who had spent months saying everything by doing almost nothing, it was entirely enough. The trouble, when it came, arrived from the direction nobody had been watching. 3 weeks after Ethan's conversation with Thomas Whitmore. A letter arrived at the house from the territorial assemblyman named Pruitt. Not a personal letter. An official one on assembly letterhead addressed to Whitmore directly. Clara brought it to Ethan on the mountain the afternoon it arrived. He read it standing on his porch once through, then again slowly. Pruitt was reopening the question of the boundary survey. Not the water rights, those were confirmed, and he couldn't touch them, but the actual northern boundary line of the Whitmore property. The original 1851 survey that August had found in the county records and used to establish the stream source was, Pruitt claimed, potentially fraudulent. Executed by a surveyor who had subsequently been found to have accepted payments from competing land interests. The assembly was recommending a new survey be conducted. Until the new survey was completed, the northern boundary, and therefore the water claim question, should be considered unresolved. It was elegant. Ethan had to acknowledge it was elegant in the way that a trap well built is elegant in a cold and functionless way. Pruitt couldn't reverse the commissioner's ruling. He couldn't contest the documents. So he was attacking the foundation of the documents themselves, the survey that made them conclusive. If the 1851 survey was declared fraudulent, everything built on it went back into dispute. Cole, Clara said. Cole, Ethan agreed. He folded the letter. He's gone, she said. He left Calder's Pass 3 weeks ago. He left Calder's Pass, Ethan said. He didn't stop. She looked at him steadily. He could see her thinking the same things he was thinking, running the angles, counting the implications, and reaching the same conclusion. He has Pruitt, she said, and Pruitt has the assembly behind him. Pruitt has debt behind him, Ethan said, which is not the same thing, but produces the same votes. What do we do? She said. He set the letter on the table and looked at it. The surveyor, he said. The one Pruitt is claiming was fraudulent. If we can find any record of him, his other surveys, his reputation, his methods, and demonstrate that the 1851 work was legitimate. That could take months, Clara said. Legal challenges, record searches. Yes, he said. And while it's in dispute, the families stay vulnerable, he said. I know. She sat down. He stayed standing. They both looked at the letter. There's another way, she said slowly. He looked at her. My father, she said. He has connections in Denver. People Pruitt works alongside, not for. People who have their own reasons to want Pruitt's debt structure looked at carefully. She met his eyes. If Pruitt's relationship with Cole became public, the nature of it, the debt, the favor trading, it might be uncomfortable enough to make him drop the survey recommendation. That's a political move, Ethan said. Yes, she said. I don't do politics, he said. I know, she said. But I do. He looked at her. She was sitting straight in his chair at his table in his cabin that she had ridden up to with cracked ribs 3 months ago, and she was looking at him with the level, certain look of a woman who had grown up watching how power moved and had spent her entire adult life pretending she hadn't been paying attention. You've been paying attention, he said. Always, she said. He thought about that. About the different kinds of useful that existed in the world, and how he had spent 6 years defining useful as the things his own hands could do. Fence lines and water rights and territorial documents. The physical, documentable, provable kind. And sitting across from him was someone whose usefulness operated in a different register entirely. The kind that moved through rooms and conversations and relationships and knew how people worked from the inside. I thought about what August had said weeks ago. Cole is counting on men to be too frightened or too tired. He thought about how Clara had not been frightened, had not been too tired, had gotten up from a cot with cracked ribs and done what needed doing in the way only she could do it. All right, he said. Talk to your father. She was already standing. What Thomas Whitmore did in the following 10 days was something Ethan was not present for and would never fully know the details of, and he did not ask because some things were better understood by their results than their methods. What he knew was this. On a Wednesday morning, the Assembly office in Denver received a formal letter from 3 senior assemblymen, none of them connected to Whitmore, directly requesting a review of Pruitt's professional conduct regarding his relationship with external land interest parties. The letter cited specific instances of favor trading that predated the Calder's pass matter by 5 years. Pruitt withdrew the survey recommendation the following day. He cited scheduling conflicts and competing priorities. He was not a man who admitted to anything. The boundary question was closed. The water rights remained confirmed. The commissioner's ruling stood unchanged and uncontested. August Reeves, upon hearing this, sat down on his hardware store counter and laughed for approximately 2 minutes without stopping. When he was done, he said to Ethan, "You know, for a man who says he doesn't do politics, you've done quite a lot of politics lately." "I married into it," Ethan said. August stopped. "Did you just say?" "Not yet," Ethan said. "Soon." August opened his mouth, and Ethan walked out of the store before he could start talking, because August Reeves, on the subject of good news, was approximately 18 minutes of commentary that Ethan did not have time for today. He found the ring in Denver. He had ridden down for a different errand, final paperwork with the commissioner's office, a formality, the kind of thing that needed a signature and a date stamp, and he was walking back to the livery when he passed a jeweler's window and stopped. It was not elaborate. He would not have looked twice at elaborate. It was a simple gold band with a single stone, set low in the setting the color of the Colorado sky in October. A particular deep blue that he had never had a name for, but which he recognized when he saw it, because it was the color of the stone in the ring she'd been wearing when he found her in the creek bed. I went in and bought it without deliberating and put it in his inside coat pocket and rode back to Calder's Pass in 2 days. He was not a man who planned ceremonies. He had thought about this. He had thought about it practically the way he thought about most things, and the conclusion he'd reached was that she was not a woman who needed ceremony. She was a woman who needed honesty. He could provide honesty. He rode directly to the Whitmore house. He did not send a message first. He went to the front door and knocked. The housekeeper answered. "Is Miss Whitmore home?" he said. "She is," the housekeeper said, and she had the look of a woman who had been watching this story develop for 3 months and had her own very clear opinions about how it should end. "I'll tell her you're here." He waited on the porch. 30 seconds. Maybe less. Clara came out. She looked at him. He looked at her. She read his face the way she always read his face, quickly, completely, with the focused attention of someone who had learned early that the things people didn't say were usually more important than the things they did. "You went to Denver," she said. "Paperwork," he said. "And," she said. He reached into his coat pocket. He did not make a speech. He was not a speech man, and she knew that. He held the ring between his thumb and forefinger and showed it to her, and watched her eyes move from his face to the ring and back to his face. "I told your father I would do this properly," he said. She looked at the ring, at the stone, and he watched something happen in her face. Not surprised. She had not been surprised by him in a long time, but a kind of arrival. The look of someone who has been traveling toward something and has just understood that they've reached it. "That color," she said quietly. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "Clara Whitmore," he said. "I am not easy to live alongside. You know that. I work before sunrise and I don't talk much, and I have opinions about fence lines that other people find excessive. I have a property on a mountain and a horse and a second room that needs a new roof, and I intend to fix that roof before October." He stopped. "I don't have what your father built, but I will put everything I have into what we build, and I will be honest with you every day of my life, and I will never once look at you and see anything other than exactly who you are." She was very still. "Is that a proposal?" she said. "It's the best one I've got," he said. She took one step forward. She took the ring from his fingers and held it in her palm and looked at it. "Yes," she said. Not the word alone, the weight of it. Everything she had ridden up mountains and gone through property files and stood in the back of government hearing rooms for. He took the ring back from her and put it on her finger, and it fit, and she looked at it on her hand for a moment. Then she looked up at him. "The roof," she said. "I want to help fix it." He looked at her. "You don't know how to fix a roof," he said. "You can teach me," she said. He almost smiled. Then he let it happen all the way. No catching it this time, and she saw it, and her face went open in the way that it went open, sometimes the way he had stopped trying not to notice. "All right," he said. They were married in September, when the worst of the summer heat had broken, and the high country had started to turn toward the colors it wore before winter. The ceremony was in Calder's Pass, in the small church at the end of the main street. And it was not a large event, because Ethan had made it clear that he was not a large event kind of man, and Clara had agreed because she had never actually wanted a large event. She had simply been expected to want one, which was different. What it was real. Thomas Whitmore sat in the front row and looked at his daughter with the expression of a man who has been wrong about something significant, and is in the process of understanding that being wrong was the best thing that happened to him. He had told Ethan the week before the wedding that he intended to update his will to reflect the new situation, to which Ethan had said he appreciated the thought, and would need to talk to Clara about it before accepting anything, which had made Whitmore look at him for a long moment, and then say that Nora had been right about him. Ethan had not asked which Nora he meant. August Reeves wept openly during the ceremony, and denied it afterward. Harker, the neighbor who kept goats and asked no questions, stood at the back and watched with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had always expected the story to end this way and had never said so. The housekeeper, who had her own opinions about everything, told 3 people in the week after the wedding that she had known from the moment she saw Mr. Walker come to the front door and ask for Clara that this was how it was going to end, and that if anyone had thought to ask her back in July, she could have saved everyone a great deal of trouble. Nobody had thought to ask her, but she was not wrong. The roof on the second room was finished in October. It took 4 days, and it was objectively a 2-person job. Ethan had known this and had been planning to find a way to do it with 1 person, because that was how he'd done most things for 6 years, and Clara had ended that plan on the first morning by showing up in work clothes with her hair pinned back and her sleeves rolled, and an expression that made it clear she was not there to watch. She was not naturally skilled at roofing. She said so plainly, which he appreciated. But she was precise, and she was careful, and she learned fast, and by the 3rd day, she was working with the focused competence of someone who had discovered a new kind of capable in herself and was quietly delighted by it. On the 4th day, when the last section was set, and they were sitting on the edge of the roof, looking at the valley below them, and the mountains across, and the sky in the particular blue of a Colorado. "October morning," she said. "I didn't know I could do that." "I know," he said. "Does that bother you, that I didn't know?" He looked at her. She was looking at the valley, not at him, and there was something in the question that was smaller and younger than she usually let things be, a remnant of a woman who had been told what she was capable of for so long that she'd started to believe the telling. "No," he said. "You know now." She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at him. "That's very simple," she said. "Yes," he said. "Most people would have said something more comforting," she said. "You don't need comfort," he said. "You fixed a roof." And she laughed. The real laugh, the one she gave freely. Now the one that had surprised him on the cot, and surprised him still, because it was the sound of someone who had found their way back to something they'd almost lost. He did not say that out loud. He thought it. Some things he kept in the place where the important things lived. Not the tin box anymore. The tin box now lived on a different shelf, with both their important things in it, but the same internal place. The one he'd been building and maintaining since he was 19 years old, and the world had taken everything it could reach, and he had learned to keep some things somewhere nothing could get to. He kept her laugh there. Alongside the memory of the creek bed, and the letter written on expensive paper, and the afternoon in the yard, when she had told him what she was doing on a mountain with cracked ribs, and he had said all right, and meant a whole life by it. The twist nobody in Calder's Pass had seen coming arrived in November. A letter from the Territorial Commissioner's office addressed to Ethan Walker regarding the water rights case that was now closed, now confirmed, now settled by every measure available. He read it standing at the table in the morning. Clara still in the second room with its new roof, and then he read it again. The original federal survey of the stream source. The one that established the stream as federal land. The one that had underpinned the entire challenge had been reviewed as part of the commissioner's standard case closure process. and in the course of that review, a surveyor's notation had been found. A minor detail in the margin of the 1847 federal record. A notation indicating that the stream source had at time of original survey been documented as lying within a 5-acre parcel that had been set aside for future homestead allocation. That 5-acre parcel had never been allocated. It was still technically available. Under territorial homestead law, a party with demonstrated prior connection to the land in question could file a claim. The Commissioner's office, in an unusual gesture of administrative clarity, had enclosed the relevant filing forms. Ethan set the letter down. He stood in the kitchen for a long minute. Then he walked to the second room and opened the door. Clara was sitting up awake with the October light coming in the window. He'd reframed along with the roof, and she looked at him and immediately said, "What happened?" He handed her the letter. She read it. Once. Then she looked up. "That's 5 acres over the stream source," she said. "Yes," he said. "If you file the claim, we own the source," he said. "Not the water, but the land the source sits on." She looked at the letter again. He watched her thinking the fast, complete thinking she did when something mattered, and then she looked up. "Cole never knew," she said. "He thought the source was on Whitmore land," Ethan said. "He built his whole claim on that. He never checked whether there was a federal parcel sitting between your boundary and the source itself." "Because nobody had a reason to look that closely," she said. "Until August found the 1847 survey," Ethan said. "And even then, we were looking at boundary lines, not land allocation status." She was quiet for a moment. "Ethan," she said, "this changes everything." "It changes some things," he said. "If we file that claim—" She stopped. "The water isn't yours legally. The land is. But if you own the land, the downstream rights aren't affected," he said. "The other families keep their prior use claims regardless. This doesn't take anything from them." "But it puts you between Cole's original argument and the water," she said. "Permanently." "Yes," he said. She held the letter. She looked at it. "File it," she said. "I intend to," he said. She looked at him. "You came and showed me first." "It affects you," he said. "It's your decision too." She was quiet. He watched her absorbed that the simple ordinary fact of it, the way he said it like it required no explanation because it didn't. "I'm not used to that," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "You'll get used to it." She handed him back the letter. And then she held onto his hand for a moment after the letter passed, and he let her, and they stood in the doorway of the room they had fixed together, while the November light came through the new window and made everything look like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. He filed the homestead claim in December. It was processed and confirmed in February of the following year, by which time the Calder's Pass Valley had settled into the particular quiet of a mountain winter, and the 6 families who had been downstream from Ethan Walker since before he arrived had stopped thinking about water rights because they had stopped needing to. The way you stop thinking about a foundation when it's solid. Beaumont died in March. He had been ill since autumn, and everyone had known it was coming, which didn't make it easier, but made it less of a shock. He left his property to his son in Denver, who had no interest in ranching, and sold it within the year to a young couple who arrived from Missouri, with 2 children, and the specific energy of people who have decided that wherever they were before was not where they were meant to be. The son, before he sold, came to Calder's Pass one last time to settle affairs. He found Ethan at the feed store, and introduced himself, and said his father had asked him to say something if he ever got the chance. "He said to tell you that he knew what you did," the son said, "and that he was grateful, and that he thought you were the kind of man his father always said this country needed more of." Ethan shook the son's hand. "Your father was a good man," he said. "This was a hard year for him to have." The son nodded. He looked like a man who had not known his father as well as he should have, and knew it. He went back to Denver the next morning. Clara planted a garden in the spring. Not a decorative garden, a practical one in the flat section beside the cabin where the afternoon light ran longest. Vegetables, herbs, a row of things. Ethan didn't know the names of, that she said were for cooking and for medicine, and that she had learned from a book she'd ordered from back east. He built her the beds. She planted them. They argued twice about the spacing. Clara thought he was leaving too much room between rows. He thought she was not leaving enough and resolved it by splitting the difference, which turned out to be correct, which neither of them commented on, because acknowledging being right about something together was apparently the kind of thing that didn't need to be said out loud. He watched her work in the garden in the mornings before the heat got serious, and he thought about a woman he'd found face down in a dry creek bed and carried up a mountain, and the difference between that woman and this one was not the fundamental thing. She had been honest and clear and certain in the creek bed, unconscious by virtue of what she was. But everything around the fundamental thing had changed. She stood differently. She moved differently. She had, in the year since they'd married, developed a way of being in this mountain cabin that was entirely her own. Not an adaptation of something she'd been before, but a new thing built from scratch on honest ground. She had written to her father every week since the wedding. He had come up to visit twice, and both times left, looking like a man who had revised something large in himself and was still in the process of understanding the revision. On his second visit, he had stood on the porch with Ethan and watched Clara work in the garden and said without preamble, "She's happy." "Yes," Ethan said. "I didn't know what that would look like," Whitmore said. "I thought I did. I thought I'd arranged for it. Several times over the years." He was quiet for a moment. "I was wrong about what it looked like." Ethan looked at Clara crouched between the rows with dirt on her hands and her hair escaping its pins and arguing quietly with a plant that wasn't doing what she wanted it to do. "It looks like that," he said. Whitmore nodded and didn't say anything else, and they stood on the porch in the spring morning and watched her, and that was enough. In the summer after the second summer, the one that did not begin with a woman unconscious in a dry creek bed. A rider came through Calder's Pass with news from Denver that Harrison Cole had moved his operations to New Mexico territory and was engaged in a land matter in a county near Albuquerque. Ethan heard this from August, who had heard it from the rider, who had no particular investment in delivering the information, and offered it the way people offer things that seem like they might be significant without knowing why. Ethan said, "I hope the people in Albuquerque read their survey records carefully." August looked at him. "That's it," August said. "That's all you have to say?" "That's all I have to say," Ethan said. He bought his supplies and went home. Clara was on the porch when he came back up the mountain, which was new. She had taken to sitting on this porch in the late afternoons since the spring turned to summer with a book or with nothing. Just sitting the way he had sat for 6 years, without a lamp in the dark, listening to the mountain go quiet. She had told him once that she used to think solitude was loneliness with better furniture. She understood now it was something else. She was still learning what to call it. He unsaddled Colt and came up to the porch, and she looked at him. "August, talk your ear off," she said. 45 minutes, he said. "A new record," she said. He sat down beside her. Not close in any formal way. Just close the comfortable proximity of two people who have stopped needing to calculate the distance between them. "Cole's in New Mexico," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I hope they're careful," she said. "I said something similar," he said. She looked at him. "Is it over?" she said. "Really over? I thought about it. About the water rights confirmed and final. About the homestead claim on the 5 acres filed and recorded. About Pruitt, who had not spoken publicly since the review of his conduct and had quietly not sought re-election. About the families on the mountain, who were doing what families on mountains in 1885 did, when the things threatening them had been removed, working, growing, getting on with the ordinary hard business of their lives. "Yes," he said. She looked at the valley. The summer evening was settling in the way Colorado summer evenings settled, the light going long and gold across everything, the heat breaking at the edges into something that would be cool by midnight. "I've been thinking," she said. "About the property," she said. "The 5 acres, the stream source." "What about it?" he said. "I want to build something there," she said. "Not a structure. I mean—" She paused. She had the look she got when she was building an idea from the inside out and needed a moment to get it to the surface. "I want to document it. The water, the rights, the whole history of what happened here. The original survey, the challenge, the legal record." I want to file it properly with the Territorial Historical Record, so that 60 years from now, when people are still farming and ranching in this valley, they can look back and see exactly what the ground they're standing on is built on." He looked at her. "That's a significant undertaking," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm a significant undertaking kind of person." He almost smiled. "Let it happen." "You'll need August for the legal history," he said. "I've already spoken to August," she said. "Of course you have," he said. She looked at him with the direct, unguarded look that still caught him sometimes when he wasn't bracing for it. "Are you going to help?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Even though it'll take months and require correspondence with at least 3 government offices, and August will talk for 45 minutes every time we ask him anything." "Even though," he said. She looked at the valley for a moment. Then she said quietly, not performing it, just saying it because it was true. And she had learned from him, partially from herself, mostly that true things were worth saying plainly. "I didn't know it could be like this." He looked at her. "Like what?" he said. "Like something I chose," she said. "Completely. All of it." She gestured a small movement that took in the cabin and the mountain and the valley below, and everything that had happened in the year and a half since a horse threw her on a summer trail and she woke up in a stranger's cabin. "I grew up in a life that was built for me. Good in a lot of ways. I'm not saying it wasn't, but it was built for someone who was going to live in a particular kind of story." She looked at him. "I'm living in a different story, the one I actually wanted." Howe was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So am I." It was the most he had said about himself in that direction in all the months since the yard and the ring and the roof and everything after. She knew it, and he knew she knew it, and she didn't make anything of it, which was exactly right. She reached over and put her hand on top of his where it rested on the arm of the chair. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that on the porch in the summer evening, while Calder's Pass went quiet below them, and the mountain went golden around them, and the valley held everything they had built together in the unshowy, solid way of things, built on honest ground. Ethan Walker had come to this mountain at 30 years old, with a grief he couldn't outrun, and a belief that enough was all a man like him was allowed. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about that in the best possible way, and he was grateful for it every morning before sunrise, when he heard her moving in the second room with its new roof, and every evening on this porch, and every ordinary in-between moment that had once been empty and was now simply and completely full. The mountain was the same mountain it had always been. The work was the same work. The mornings came the same way they always had before the light touched the ridgeline, before the valley woke, before the world asked anything of anyone. But he was not the same man who had ridden down a trail and found a woman face down in a dry creek bed and carried her home without stopping to think about what it would cost him. How was the man who had paid the cost and found that what it bought was worth every single thing he'd spent? And on the mountain above Calder's Pass, in the summer of 1885, with her hand in his, and the valley below them, holding all the evidence of a year well fought and honestly won. Ethan Walker was, for the first time in 6 years, exactly where he was supposed to be. That was not a small thing. That was everything.